Hey Year 12s! Today we're discussing A Separation, directed by Asghar Farhadi, in relation to encountering conflict. If this isn't one of your texts, or you haven't watched that video on encountering conflict yet, stop, go watch that first and come back. There are 4 possible texts you could be studying for encountering conflict, of which this is one. Make sure you're not watching videos for texts you're not studying. Alright, on to A Separation, which I'll just call the film from now on. Farhadi's film, set in Iran, explores a whole spectrum of intersecting conflicts stemming from underlying social and personal problems. The audience is made to see the ways in which conflict can breed further conflict, and how the perspectives of individuals can differ in relation to the same event. While you can't mimic the style of the film for your context writing, you should still be aware of the cinematic techniques to deepen your analysis. Some key techniques to look for and analyze include cinematography, shot, which includes long, short, or establishing, pan and zoom, fade, angle, cuts and transitions, the direction, lighting, frame, and finally, sound. More importantly though, let's look at the big ideas of encountering conflict, which emerge from A Separation. First, let's examine the portrayal of the causes of conflict within the film. A great deal takes place off-screen in this film, which is presented as exacerbating the conflicts which play out on-screen. In the opening scene, Simin identifies that she does not wish to raise her daughter under such conditions. Throughout the film, the tense political climate of Iran is hinted at repeatedly, as well as the differing positions of men and women within that society. This external tension is presented as having a significant influence on some of the characters of the film, in particular on the relationship between Nada and Simin. In addition to this, poverty provides significant fuel for conflict within the film. Razia is desperate for work, and later payment for a day's work, because of her desperate financial situation. Being laid off and thrown deeply into debt causes Hojat to be depressed, possibly abusive, and threatens him with the physical conflict of imprisonment if he cannot pay back lenders. The desperation that Razia and Hojat are experiencing then plays itself out in the tension between pursuing justice through the courts and possibly sending Nada to jail, and accepting the blood money that could pull them out of a desperate financial situation. What's more, even though Razia desperately wishes to accept the blood money that could save her family, she faces an internal conflict as a result. She believes that maintaining the lie that awards her money will harm her daughter. Differing perspectives between characters also creates situations in which conflict flourishes. The audience is given a unique perspective within this film. We see the conflicts take place from various perspectives, and often have more information than the characters involved. This emphasizes the ways in which characters are limited to their own worldviews. This includes the limited information that characters have, such as Nada believing that Razia has stolen money, even though the audience knows Simin used it to pay delivery men, and different perspectives of the same event, such as the contrast between how Nada and Razia see the act of tying his father to the bed. Rarely are characters united in how they see an event, or the importance they invest in different ideas, such as truth or justice. Perhaps more than anything, A Separation portrays the ways in which conflict can lead to other conflicts. It is the interpersonal conflict between Razia and Nada that, apparently originally, leads to her miscarriage and the legal case against him. Even before this, the conflict between Nada and Simin, and within Nada, about his father's condition, have negatively affected him so as to be more aggravated toward Razia. Legal suit leads to a countersuit, and the situation spirals more and more out of control, as more and disparate forms of conflict feed off one another. In this way, the film portrays the way in which, without resolution, conflict breeds further conflict. Alright, on to another big idea, types of conflict. The forms of conflict which appear in this film are obviously diverse and innumerable, but there are several interesting pinpoints of clashes between and within individuals that are particularly noteworthy. Many of the conflicts, or at least the way they play themselves out, appear specific to Iranian society. The legal system portrayed is quite different than the one we have in Australia, as is the dynamic between men and women. In particular, the conflicts faced by Razia as a result of Hojat's debt are unique from most people's experiences in Australia. Nonetheless, some conflicts do stand out as universal. Temre's painful placement between 2 parents going through a divorce is utterly recognizable, regardless of nationality. Internal conflicts play a significant role in this film. Nada and Simin are seen to struggle within themselves about the desolation of their marriage and how to bridge the gap between them. Nada is afflicted by his father's deterioration and how best to handle the difficult situations he finds himself in. Perhaps the most striking example of internal conflict, however, is that of Razia on her first day at work for Nada. She finds that the old man has failed to warn her that he needed to use the bathroom and, as a result, soiled himself. She is a deeply religious woman, bound by her faith not to see any man naked other than her husband. Razia's struggle with this reality is clear. She is torn between her faith and her human decency that drives her to clean and clothe the elderly man. Her internal tossing and turning on this matter is so great that she reaches outside of herself and phones a religious hotline to ask if bathing the man would be a sin. This particular crisis of conscience portrays the way in which a decision, or different parts of ourselves, can create internal conflict. Third, let's look at the way the film depicts different responses to conflict. While many of the characters in this film confront the same conflict, they do not do so in the same way. Their responses are specific to them as people and their particular motivations and desires. One response, which is shown as being fairly consistent, perhaps as a philosophical statement by the director, is the obsession with one's own suffering. Most of the characters speak and act in a way that shows they are unable to see outside the hurt that has been done to them. Hodjat and Nada are unable to speak with the judge in a way that acknowledges the harm that's been done to anyone but themselves. Hodjat about his wife's employment and the loss of his son, and Nada about the treatment of his father. This response displays how experiencing conflict can narrow a person's perspective to only their own suffering. Furthermore, this response shows the ways in which the roles of conflict can be subjective. This film does not have a set victim and villain, but many different characters who might claim the former identification. Razia sees herself as a victim of Nada, and Nada sees himself a victim of injustice. Perhaps the only characters who might universally be recognized as victim are the children who are entangled in the conflict, Terme and Somaya. A powerful example of contrasting responses to conflict is between Simin and Nada. These two characters are often involved in the same conflict, but are totally unaligned in how they behave as a result. The legal conflict which Nada faces over the death of Razia's fetus makes him invest in the idea of clearing his name through the courts. In contrast, Simin fears for Terme's safety and for what the courts might find, and encourages Nada to pay the blood money. For him, paying the blood money is admitting fault, and his pride drives him to refuse. For Simin, bringing an end to the conflict promptly is more important than fighting for truth or fairness. He accuses her of being a coward, and she agrees that when it comes to her daughter's safety, she is a coward. The notion of truth is also contested between characters. Notably, Terme is fixated on truth throughout the film, even though she lies for her father to the judge. In contrast, Nada believes that truth and justice are not necessarily mutually compatible when it comes to the justice system. He explains at length that truth is a difficult concept, that one can know something and yet not know it in a moment of passion. He tells her the law doesn't care, because he believes that the courts have no room for nuance or grey area. The suggestion here is that a formal legal process has a limitation in the way it can create justice. It is not able to reconcile two people's apparently disparate truths without finding one wrong and one right. Nada is further shown to question the worth of formal legal processes in the doctor's office with his father. He is prepared to launch a countersuit against Razia, but thinks better of it while roughly undressing his father. A great deal of this film is absorbed by interpersonal conflicts, as displayed through arguing and shouting, but there are other ways in which conflict manifests itself as well. Razia's body language and use of her chatter to cover her at times displays her internal conflict and fear. Alternatively, Nada's internal conflict spills over and physically manifests itself in the scene where he bathes his catatonic father after pushing Razia. He cries against the old man, clearly overcome with the sadness at the rate at which his life is falling apart. This leads us on to thinking about the ways in which this film depicts resolution. In many ways, the film is critical of the idea of a formal justice system, or at least the Iranian courts. The opening scene positions the audience as a judge, looking on at the conflict between Nada and Simin. The system fails Simin here. The laws in Iran do not allow for no-fault divorce in which parties can separate for reasons other than abuse or infidelity. It is clear that Simin wants a resolution to the conflict. She is asking for a clean break from her marriage so that she can flee the country with her daughter. She says, "Judge, I've come here so you can solve my problem," and insists my problem is not small. Her plea is in vain, however. The judge responds, "Please don't take up the court's time," and rejects the case. The conflict between husband and wife is left unresolved by formal legal processes. A separation also considers the ways in which conflicts can end without resolution. Many of the problems faced by characters come to a close without the solution being found or a compromise being reached. Presumably, the charges against Nader are dropped and no blood money is paid, but this does not resolve any of the conflicts faced by Hodjat and Razia, or between Nader and his wife and child. Equally, a permanent separation is granted by the court for Nader and Simon, but this does not appear to resolve the conflict. Neither of them seem happy or even relieved after so long fighting, and Termeh is clearly brought no release by the decision. The immediate conflicts may have come to an end, but resolution remains elusive. Lastly, let's look at the big idea of the consequences of conflict. Conflicts give rise to often serious and lasting consequences in this film. Separate from resolution or an end to the conflict are the effects on the lives of individuals involved. The act of pushing Razia out the door happens quickly and seems small in the grand context of the fight between her and Nader. For the audience, it is one moment in a sequence of a longer fight, and for Nader, it is not a significant exertion of physical force. And yet, up until the point where Razia reveals the truth about the car hitting her, both audience and other characters are led to believe that this small moment has had catastrophic consequences. Even if the miscarriage was caused elsewhere, this event demonstrates the ways in which physical conflict can send significant ripples through the lives of others. Compare this with a real-world example of the split-second decision to hit someone. One punch kills, or coward punches, are discussed frequently in the Australian media. Consider the ways in which something that happens very quickly can have massive consequences for even those who are only peripherally involved. One powerful display of the consequences that conflict can have on people's lives comes in one of the final scenes of the film, after Razia admits the truth to Hodjat and he storms from their house. Moments before, Somaya and Termeh were playing together in the yard with smiles and squeals of joy, but now their eyes catch the living room and they glower at one another. The young girls were not directly involved in the conflict, nor have they done anything to one another, but the clash between their parents sends shockwaves through their own lives, which they take out on one another. This small moment shows the ways in which conflict can have devastating consequences, even for the bystanders who cannot escape the ripples of the harm. This is just a bit of a taste of encountering conflict within a separation, but hopefully it gives you some good talking points for your next context piece. Make sure to check out the video on encountering conflict and how to write different context pieces. Thanks for watching, and happy studying.